Okay, this time I'm getting straight to the point. Today I seek to answer a question that's been asked many times in the past. Why is manga, unlike sequential art media in other countries, drawn in black and white, and only coloured on special pages? Now this is the point where people might tell me to take my head out my ass and say it's because manga is released weekly, and it's always done by one artist who does all the character designs by themselves, unless there's a team involved and they handle it Ashiro Gimuto style. So basically the reason that many people have come to accept is that due to the detail in the art that has to be put out weekly, colour is simply treated as a non-essential part of the medium. In other words,
ain't nobody got time for that.
Okay, this is a valid claim, but let's just leave that to elaborate on later. I think we can find the reason for manga's lack of colour in its origins and its context in Japanese history, as well as the way it's handled today. Manga being in black and white is as much a part of the medium as it being read right to left. When it comes to basic history, there's not much I can say that Wikipedia or another more informed article can't tell you. But the long and short of it is, the kanji for manga literally translates to cartoon, denoting its less serious nature. This all stems from the artist who coined the term, named Hokusai. Okay, just as a side note, I freaking love Hokusai. He's like one of the best artists of all bloody time. I mean, some of the stuff he did was called The 35 Ways of Viewing Mount Fuji, if I got the name right. And it looks so good. I mean, I'll just put up a few pictures, but every single one of them looks like the wallpaper that should be my life. I mean, it's just, why doesn't this come with Windows, pre-packaged in one of those wallpaper sets? This is all great art. Back to the point. Now, before the history buffs in the room tell me that the word existed long before Hokusai, I will incur the Frankenstein argument and say his definition of manga is closest to how we see it and define it today. So how do we define it? Well, he defined it as non-serious black and white pictures. Hokusai coined the term to refer to a short collection of prints that were made in black and white. These have become known as the Hokusai manga, which I feel was a horribly missed opportunity when you could have named it something like Swimmers on a Stick, or I smoke so much I see myself with my clothes on. Back to the point. Hokusai drew his manga on a series of wood prints, so obviously he couldn't colour them, because printed wood doesn't do too well with colour. But this is my point. Hokusai could have done these works in colour and not named them manga. There's a point to him naming his series of non-colour works manga. In a way, this was Hokusai's way of expressing what manga to him was, even though it hadn't been made into a thing yet. Now if we go further back in time, we can find the works of Kibyoushi. Kibyoushi are the real reason for why I say manga is in black and white because of its heritage. In the Edo period, that period of time when Japan was chilling, minding its own business before Matthew Perry came to kick in the door asking for some good old-fashioned capitalist trade. Sorry, historical weeaboo humor. The Japanese were doing what they did best, cutting shit, fighting wars, and drawing like bosses. Kibyoushi are an example of these artistic endeavours, which lacked colour because they were trying to portray text alongside pictures. Now this is much closer to the manga we know and love, and here is why pictures had no colours. Since the text was black and the drawings were black and white, the story would literally feel like part of the drawing. This kind of explains how katakana is used in modern manga. Just how Western comics use special bolded letters to denote activity, the Japanese use syllable-based writing forms known as katakana to denote activity in their books. This is the strongest link to modern manga that Kibyoushi has. The old Kibyoushi used text all over the freaking page. Okay, I can't read Japanese and all, but it looks like every detail is expressed in this picture. I mean, the writing is everywhere, on places where you wouldn't even see writing in most comics today. And this is especially why Kibyoushi is unique in the way it is, and where manga gets its own unique qualities. Oh, and another side note, Kibyoushi is also known as one of the first forms of sequential art. So yeah, Japan in a way led to the creation of comic books. Obviously not the ones we know and love today, but they are basically one of the first comic makers. Not being a weeaboo, just stating historical facts. Now we move on to the thing that most manga historians are much more familiar with, the Western influence. Now, as a comic book fan, I didn't even have to do the research for this part, but I did anyway, lest people call me a lazy, nonsensical half-wit. Modern manga's biggest draw from Western comics is the panels. Panels are freaking great. They let artists construct multiple events on the same page, as well as speech bubbles. Those allowed their characters to speak on the page without filling the rest of the page with words. Now here's the thing. Western influences shaped how manga are drawn today by basically homogenizing the style of storytelling that comics and manga used. But one thing wasn't influenced. Manga stayed colorless. Now anybody can make their own cynical hypotheses as it's cheaper or it takes less time, which aren't incorrect by any stretch, but they kinda disregard what manga started as. And what it started as was an art form designed to bring literature closer to illustration, removing the vibrance of color and substituting with the vibrance of prose, as well as direct strokes of ink. Now, for those who still feel I'm spouting crap and that manga isn't colored because it's released weekly, let me say this. The theory manga isn't colored because it's released weekly is what I would call a weed smoking theory. As its name suggests, such a theory sounds very good when you're high or simply think like you're high, but if you sit down and take a look at hard facts, it crumbles pretty fast. So manga doesn't have time to color its pages because it's drawn weekly? Well, so are Western comics. This is why being part of two nerd fandoms is a useful occurrence. Most of the biggest comic publishers, the two biggest comic publishers, release comics on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. They are scripted, penciled, inked, and colored within that time. Now, there is some credence to the one-man mangaka theory, but even someone who's read or watched Bakuman can tell you that it takes a team of assistants to put out a manga. Some artists may have more assistants than others, but the principle is the same. Comics have multiple people working on them, so do manga. Now finally, here is where all arguments go to die in a burning pit of sulfur. Not all manga is weekly. No one seems to factor in the time constraint argument when discussing monthly or even unscheduled series. Now why don't you think these series have color simply because they have more time? It's simple. It's in the lifeblood of the medium. Manga may not use the same forms of storytelling as its predecessor Kibyoushi, but that's simply evolution. Its identity as a separate art form lies in its sparse use of color. So now you know why manga doesn't use color as liberally as its counterparts in other cultures. Asking why manga is in black and white is the same as asking why it's read right to left. It had its birth and evolution in a culture where such was expected of it, not because of a cynical reason such as time constraint or budget concerns. Oh, and if there just so happened to be any mangaka watching this vid, now you have an excuse to tell your Western friends when they ask you why you don't use color. That's it for me, Nino signing out. See you when I make another vid, which will hopefully not take as long as it did to make this one.
A long
Goodbye.
day's night training. Shoto, plumber, pasta bowl, incognito, Shimeji for De Niro. Shibuya, sewer, Genkai, Gamera brain. Wielding trucks, decks, flipping and grinding for tourists with the digi